All right, let's talk about a huge question in economics. What really makes a country rich over the long haul? For ages, the answer seemed obvious, right? Just get more stuff, more factories, more machines, more capital. But it turns out that's not the whole story. The real engine of long-term prosperity, it's something you can't touch. It's ideas. Today, we're going to unpack the theory that completely flipped how we think about economic growth. Okay, so let's start with the big puzzle, the one that really kept economists up at night for decades. You look around the world and you see this massive gap between the wealthy nations and the poor ones. And here's the weird part. That gap often isn't closing. In fact, sometimes it gets bigger. Why is that? Answering that question, well, it forces us to completely rethink what growth even is. And to really get why this new way of thinking was such a game changer, we first have to understand the old problem everyone was stuck on. We've got to look at the puzzle that the classic models, like the famous Solow model, just couldn't solve. So this right here, this shows a huge disconnect between theory and reality. The old models predicted something called convergence, and the logic kind of makes sense, right? If you build a brand new factory in a poor country that has very few, the impact should be huge, way bigger than building yet another factory in a rich country. So logically, poor countries should grow faster and eventually catch up. But that's just not what we saw in the data. The real world showed these gaps weren't just there, they were stubbornly persistent. And then there's part two of the puzzle. When economists like Paul Romer started digging into the history of the world's leading economies, they found something really weird. Growth wasn't just happening, it was actually speeding up. Think about it. It went from basically zero in the 17th century to a little bit to the explosive compounding growth we're used to today. And the old theories? They had absolutely no explanation for this acceleration either. So, you see, the old models had this massive hole in their logic. They all agreed that, yeah, technology was the thing driving long-run growth. But they treated technology like it was a total black box. They basically said new tech just appears out of thin air, like manna from heaven. It just falls from the sky, completely disconnected from any of the choices people or companies were actually making. And that just doesn't feel right, does it? And this is where a totally new idea comes onto the scene, one that turns everything on its head and finally cracks open that black box. And that idea is called endogenous growth theory. Endogenous just means coming from within. The theory says the engine of growth isn't some external mystery. Nope, it's internal. It's built right into the economic system. Growth happens because people and companies make deliberate choices. They choose to invest, they choose to learn, they choose to innovate. It's not falling from the sky. We're the ones building the engine. So, okay, how does this internal engine actually work? Well, the first big attempt to model it was built around a really simple but powerful concept. We learn by doing. This slide shows this awesome virtuous cycle. It all starts when one firm invests in, say, some new machinery. Okay, so its workers don't just operate the machines. As they use them, they figure out smarter, better ways to do things. They generate new ideas. But, and this is the crucial part, those new ideas don't just stay inside that one factory. They spill over. Other companies see them, learn from them, and the whole economy gets a boost. It's what economists call a positive externality, and it drives everything. So in this first pass at the model, ideas are basically a happy accident that comes from investing in physical stuff. The more capital you have, the more ideas you get. And this was a really elegant way to explain why growth could just keep going forever, and also why rich countries, with all their capital, could just keep pulling further and further ahead. But this model also uncovered a really deep problem. Just think about it for a second. If you're a company and you know that any great new idea your workers come up with is just going to spill over and help your competitors for free, well, you don't get the full benefit of your investment, do you? So you're not going to invest as much as you should. This means the free market, left to its own devices, will always systematically underinvest in the very thing that drives growth for all of us. This problem led to an even more sophisticated model in 1990, one that asked a new question. What if ideas aren't just a happy accident? What if there's something we produce on purpose, for profit, like in an idea factory? So in this newer model, Paul Romer breaks the economy down into three parts. First, you've got a research sector. Its only job is to churn out new ideas and designs. Second, there's an intermediate goods sector. These guys take those new ideas, patent them, and produce unique capital goods. Think a specific kind of software or a new microchip. And finally, you have the final goods sector, which takes all that specialized stuff, combines it with labor, and makes the products that you and I actually buy. And this setup gets us to the most important choice in the entire economy. We only have so many people, right? So every single person we put to work as a researcher, creating the ideas for tomorrow, is one less person who can actually make the stuff we want to consume today. It's a fundamental trade-off. And here is the huge leap from that first learning by doing model. Now, people choose to be innovators. Why? Because there's a profit motive. You come up with a great idea, you patent it, and for a while, you get a monopoly. That monopoly power lets you make enough money to cover your research costs and hopefully turn a nice profit. Innovation is no longer an accident, it's an intentional business decision. So you can see the two views right here, side by side. We go from thinking of ideas as just this accidental byproduct of buying new machines to seeing ideas as the central, most important product of a dedicated research industry driven by smart people trying to make a profit. Okay, so if growth is really driven by these choices being made inside the economy, what does that mean for policy, for governments? What can we actually do to make things better? Well, the theory is pretty clear that even this idea factory market isn't perfectly efficient on its own. It's getting pulled in two different directions at once. On the one hand, you've got those awesome knowledge spillovers. New ideas help future researchers for free, which is fantastic for society. But on the other hand, the very patents we use to encourage innovation also create monopolies. And monopolies mean higher prices for everyone. It's a tricky balance. And the data on this is just wild. The evidence suggests those positive spillovers are absolutely enormous. Studies have estimated that the social rate of return on R&D, that's the benefit to all of society, is somewhere between 40 and 60%. That is way, way higher than the private return, the profit that the company itself makes. That giant gap is a flashing red light telling us the market, left alone, is not creating nearly enough new ideas. So this all leads to a really powerful conclusion. Because the free market will always underinvest in ideas, there is a clear, important role for good policy. Governments can actually change a country's long-term growth trajectory. They can do it by subsidizing research, by funding education to get more skilled researchers, and by making sure our patent laws are smart and balanced. So, what's the ultimate takeaway here? Economic prosperity isn't about luck. It's not some mystery force from the outside. It's about the choices we make. It all comes down to the institutions and incentives we put in place to build the best possible idea factory. And that leaves us with a huge question to think about. If ideas are truly the engine of growth, are we doing everything we can to build a better factory?